why is it that the Social Security Trust Fund really has nothing in it? I know people say, oh, well, there's trillions of dollars of government bonds in there. Oh, great. I mean, those government bonds are basically unserviceable as it is. I mean, forgetting even that portion, just the on-balance sheet debt of the government. But why did they not, for over 40, when the Social Security system was running huge surpluses, and those surpluses could have been invested in a 50-50 stock bond ETF mixture and have, I mean, it could be the largest pool of dollars on the planet, and it wasn't done. Now, I have my theory as to why they didn't do it, but it's an embarrassing theory if I'm right, which is basically that they were using those surpluses to make the deficits look better at the time. But they did that right through the time in the late 90s when the government started running such large surpluses that Alan Greenspan publicly worried that we'd have no government bond market by 2010 because we would have paid off all the debt. There was a long time there where we could have been funding, and that didn't mean that it would be like a 401k, but I mean, just a typical corporate pension plan is invested in stocks and bonds, right? Even though the benefits to their plan beneficiaries are guaranteed by the company as long as the company stays in business. So the government would not be endangering people's Social Security, and quite the contrary, they would have been protecting it. Now we're in a position where, you had Luke Gromen on here recently, great podcast. He's brilliant. I'd call him always brilliant, to use one of his favorite terms. And he was saying that there's $2.6 trillion of basically boomer entitlements that are now having to come on balance sheet. The days of kicking the can down the road are over. And that didn't have to be that way. There could have been real money there to fund those benefits, and how that didn't happen. But you tell me, have you heard anybody else bring this up?
It's funny. It's like you're pitching me a big fat softball here, because I just put out a video last week I'll link up to here that doesn't go into exactly this, but it really delves deeply into the failure of society plus the government in terms of where we are today in terms of retirement savings for America's senior and the massive tsunami of boomers that are continuing to retire. So just to give you a couple of quick stats here, in terms of how poorly funded Social Security is, the average monthly payment is $1,600 a month, which we all know is not a livable wage at all. In fact, the average rent payment in America is $1,900 a month. So it doesn't even cover a monthly rental expense. And at its current, the trustees just announced a report last month, and it says that current trajectory, Social Security Trust is on track to be insolvent by 2035. So that's only 13 years from now. Medicare is even worse. It's on track to be insolvent by 2028. That's in 6 years. So to your part about, putting ourselves in a position nationally where these programs are just woefully underfunded, where we could have had a much different story if we had just been more prudent about how we allocated that funds. Absolutely. At this point, I think it's an unavoidable national crisis. And Luke does a really good job of just basically saying, hey, when you look at the current trajectory here, we are essentially going to be spending all of our tax receipts. In fact, the overall cost is going to be more just to pay interest on our national debt and fund these entitlement programs. Like, they're basically going to swamp the entire budget in the not too distant future if things don't change. So people are talking around the edges of the problem like this.
Right, around the edges, but I just have not heard it addressed, like why back in the 1980s when it started running the big surpluses, because you had so many boomers entering the workforce and entering their prime earning years. I mean, that was the time to do it. And yet there was I never saw anything about that. Maybe Bush Jr. had some kind of proposal, but of course it got shot down. I think that anytime people talk about putting it into something other than the government securities, it's like somehow viewed as jeopardizing it when it's actually completely the opposite. But to your point about the rundown of these trust funds, so what's going to happen in the meantime? It means that they're going to be selling treasury bonds to pay benefits, right? And that's why it's not exhausted. It's running a deficit, has been for several years, but there's still this big pool of treasuries in there. But to actually pay benefits with that, you got to sell them. And guess what? At the same time, you've got the Fed doing QT. And then let's just say that we really are going into recession. What's going to happen to government revenues? Right. And I think it's Luke Gromen, once again, who's pointed out that in May, government tax receipts fell 16%, which is a shocking number. Now, he points out there's a lot of month-to-month volatility. I actually thought it was going to be a pretty good number just because the IRS is so slow processing and they've been having a windfall, as we know. I mean, government revenues have exploded up until basically May. which kind of fits in with everything else. Like I was talking about how rapidly things have fallen off the cliff. And we hear this anecdotally from our clients too, that say, oh, my business was fine until April or May, and then it's just almost shut down. And so the point is he's well conveyed, is that once you're in a situation where your revenues are down, your expenses are going to go up because there's going to be more unemployment claims and other social support spending. You have foreign buyers that really aren't very interested in buying treasuries, especially given the sanctions. There's a lot of countries that go, I don't know if I want to hold my reserves in treasuries anymore. So your buyers are shrinking. The Fed, of course, has been the huge buyer. So it's gone from a huge buyer to a seller. So,
your biggest and most cost insensitive buyer has left the building.
Exactly. That's a little terrifying. So that's why this could be a really difficult period. I mean, I do think that we could get a break with inflation, though I think there's some hot months ahead, hot numbers to come this summer. But one thing about recession, and this happened, I'm old enough to remember the 1970s, unfortunately. And even in the inflationary 70s, when there was a recession, inflation came down hard. So I think we're going to see inflation decline. Now, this is something that is really quite a fascinating factor that I bet even you haven't heard. 17% of US consumers now expect deflation over the next few years. That's double what it was in 2008. So that's very surprising to me. It's maybe telling us that there is just this tremendous fear that the thing is going to blow apart and prices will actually fall. And of course, we're seeing that the CRB metals index is down something like 24%. Lumber's been crushed. Even oil's still over 100, but it's come down substantially. Natural gas is down to $6 per MMBTU, which is like a gallon of gas. Interestingly, in Europe here last month, there was 1 week where gas went up $12 alone.
Yeah. 1
week in Europe, double what the total price is in the US, which just shows the terrible situation that Europe is in. And just as a little footnote, we should probably talk about energy, since that's one of my strong suits and favorite areas. But JP Morgan is saying we could actually see oil go to $400 a barrel if there starts to be a major cutoff of Russian oil, which everybody seems to want except Russia. But it's, again, be careful what you wish for. And if they cut by or sanctioned by 4 or 5 million barrels a day, I kind of doubt it'll be that severe, because they're pretty clever at getting around the restrictions and the blockages.
Right. Let's take half that price. Still, kind of catastrophic to the economy. If you enjoyed this video clip, click here to watch another one you should like.